Good evening, Razorback fans. Welcome to the one, the only Hog Talk podcast, live from the Sterling Soap and Roastery Studios, part of the Believe in Buzz Radio Networks on 106.7 in Central Arkansas. All live shows are presented to you by Arkansas Brewing Company in downtown Ozark. I am Porter Hayes, and we're also brought to you by Bet Online. Get the latest odds, lines, matchups, reports for baseball, football, boxing, golf, and more. Bet Online continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting and your favorite casino and card games available to play right from your phone. Head over to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and get in on the action. Remember to use your promo code BLEAV for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet Online, where the game starts, and we head to the Meadows Lumber Hotline and bring in David Murray of dogbite.com. David, appreciate you making time to come on our show, and welcome to the Hog Talk podcast.
Well, Porter, I appreciate the invitation. I always enjoy talking to everybody around the Southeastern Conference. In fact, I did SEC radio this afternoon, and with my cousin, well, if we're cousins this side of Scotland, somewhere, Aaron Murray and others. But yeah, looking forward to making the trip up there. I had to miss the 21 game for various reasons, but otherwise I've been to Fayetteville several times. Yes, I was there for the 2015 freezer and some other events. I was there the day that Matt Jones looked like Superman, just running around and scrambling to win that game. I think, 2003? Does that sound about right? So,
yep.
Yeah. So I've had some fun times in this series. Of course, Mississippi State's done well in the series lately. I think won 8 of 11, and if not for a dubious flag 2 years ago, who knows how that plays? But it's a good rivalry. It's still, even after 30 years now, I have to keep reminding myself that Arkansas is in the SEC, but only because I'm old and I came in on the 10-team SEC. So sometimes, and if you think that's difficult, try reminding yourself every day that Missouri's in the SEC.
Exactly.
That still seems odd. Anyway, just enjoy talking to you, and let's talk some football.
Yes. Well, first of all, condolences again, to passing of Mike Leach. And that's where I kind of want to start off, big shoes to fill, not only, taking over for Leach, but yet coming into the SEC. What have you seen? I mean, I know both teams won their first 2 games and they're on the skid in the SEC, but what growth have you seen from Coach Arnett and just the challenges coming into the season, not only the SEC, but the daunted SEC West?
Yeah. Then the last year of the SEC West is we have to keep reminding people because rightly or wrongly, I tend to think wrongly, but for whatever reason, we're getting away from divisions next year when your friends over to the West start joining this conference. They're renewing some old Arkansas rivalries. Of course, Zach Arnett won his first game, the bowl game, and one reason why he was quickly promoted to head coach, well, most of the team came to the administration and said, this is the man we want for our head coach. 3 years they had known him, and frankly, everyone in the business knew that Zach Arnett was headed to be a head coach someday. Did it happen on schedule, ahead of schedule? Only time's going to show that. I know emotionally he was ready for it, intellectually, but there's still things that a coach has to learn only by making the mistakes on the field in real game and bearing the burden. So you're seeing some of those growing pains now that we're here, not just into his first full season, but SEC season as well. The fan base still likes Zach Arnett. For a guy who, as best we know, never set this side of the Mississippi River until he was hired by Mike Leach, he fits in Starkville extremely well in Mississippi. And I say that as a farm boy from the Free State of Jones myself. And his staff, he went and got a bunch of veterans. Like most young coaches would go out and hire peers, people they're comfortable with, people who owe their career to him. Instead, he was confident enough to find a bunch of old dogs from around the SEC who have been there, done that, and are willing to work with the young new coaches developing. So I think long haul, if Zach Arnett can just pull it together, finish this season with some momentum, get the recruiting under control, which is a whole nother issue, maybe even beyond Mississippi State's control with NIL. That's a topic for another year. I think he'll be okay, but his team needs to start winning games. And this weekend is another opportunity after an open date against an Arkansas team that, well, you've got 2 squads. Somebody's going to come out of here with their first SEC win sometime around 2:30 Saturday afternoon in Fayetteville.
Yes. And do you think, of course, your 3-game skid was LSU, South Carolina, Alabama. And then, of course, you go over to Arkansas and look at the A&M, LSU, Ole Miss, and Bama. So it's kind of an even even kilter schedule, if you want to say. But how much do you think helped, Western Michigan and then a bye week coming into this Arkansas game helps them prepare to, especially with the first year head coach of, all right, let's get our, because Arkansas and Mississippi State's in a similar situation of, all right, let's reset. We're coming off a long road trip, or we're coming off a 3-game skid, got to win. Coming into this game in Arkansas with their, backs to a corner. I mean, what is Mississippi State preparing for this Saturday in Fayetteville?
Well, as far as what they're preparing for, Arnett and the coordinators we talked to are pretty clear. And frankly, I've watched a few Arkansas games when Mississippi State was not playing. I attended all the games so far this year, but fortunately, there's been some times when the game times are opposite enough that I could catch some of the action, like this past week with Alabama. And what we're preparing for is a pretty similar Arkansas approach to football, as in line up, try to knock you down on both sides of the ball, just classic power. Maybe not the skill personnel on offense that was there once upon a time. I think you're still showing some signs from the Bielema years, the Chad Morris years, but it's getting gradually restocked. We understand that Rocket Sanders is probably out, but I don't make a big deal out of that. Yes, he's a great running back, but you've got good running backs there. And you've got KJ Jefferson, who many a Mississippi State fan has said, well, why did we try to recruit him? Well, he did nothing that fit the air raid offense. So that's not a knock on him. It's just there's fits and there's non-fits. He would have fit Dan Mullen's spread perfectly. You saw what Dan Mullen did with Dak Prescott. KJ Jefferson would have been right up his alley as that kind of player and probably develop into a better passer as well. So you've got a physical Arkansas offense that can run the ball, likes to run the ball, will run the ball, even when you know they're going to run the ball. That's what State's preparing for on that side, and that's been the problem for the Bulldogs. This defense is struggling. Yes, they've had injuries. The defensive line in particular is shorthanded. Maybe get defensive end Devontae Russell back this weekend, which helps. The linebackers are having to play a little closer to the line of scrimmage than maybe you want to, which puts more pressure on a defensive secondary that's given up something like 80 to 85% passing in 3 SEC games. Now, let me repeat that. 80 to 85% completions in 3 SEC games. You talked about State's schedule. Mississippi State should have won at South Carolina. I was at that game, and even giving up the 14-0 lead early, they still should have won the game. They didn't. So here they are, 3-3 instead of what they should have been 4-2. So the pressure is on. Now, on the other side of the ball, obviously the questions will be, and I'm sure we'll get more into the detail about Will Rogers and what's going to happen at quarterback there, but State has got to have Jacovius Marks back healthy enough to get the game started, then turned over to a good stable of running backs. They've got to get excellent play from the line of scrimmage that, frankly, has struggled to adjust to the new offensive scheme during parts of this season, but it should be coming into click. I think if there's any one group that really benefited from the week off, it could be the offensive line figuring themselves out because they have time to address some of these issues. And you get a wide receiver, Justin Robinson, back this week. At least we think they will, to go with the flashy guys, Tulu Griffin and Xavier Thomas. You've got the offensive tools to make plays against Arkansas, which is very sound on the front line, exceptional at linebacker. Maybe you got some opportunities to take advantage of the secondary. But then it comes down to, and we can move right into this, quarterback.
Yes. and talking about the quarterback, and I'm not going to put too much into if a backup is played, because last time we did that, it was A&M, and we all know what happened in the A&M game. So you can't, because you're still in the SEC. I mean, I think, a lot of the Alabama and Georgia dynasty with the quarterback, it's always, you're still facing SEC talent. So just because one is, but you were talking about Jacovius Marks, and I was looking at the stats here, and it seems like the backup or the second leading rusher and the second leading passer are the same person with Mike Wright. So if Rogers isn't ready to go, is that who they would lean towards? And talk to us about, if that is where they go, kind of give us not a scouting report, but a little bit about him as a quarterback.
Well, for those who haven't kept up closely with the Bulldogs, Will Rogers, senior, true senior, by the way, who did not play against Arkansas in 2020, but did start the 21-22 games. He was landed hard on his left shoulder in the Western Michigan game and did not play the rest of the game after a trip to the locker room and the training room to have it checked out. So we don't know his status. Every time that Zach Arnett and Kevin Barbet have been asked directly or as vaguely indirectly, which got them laughing last week, and we try to ask the same question so many ways to get the same answer. I have no update, so they're not going to tell us at this point. Do I think he could play this weekend? Yes. Do I think he will play? I'm really doubtful at this point, because why risk it? Because Mississippi State, let's segue quickly to the outside picture for Mississippi State. They're battling for bowl eligibility. 3 wins already. You've got Southern Miss on campus. After last night, I'm sure everybody saw what happened to the Golden Eagles down at South Alabama. You feel pretty good about that one. So you've got to find 2 SEC wins out of these remaining 5 games. And Arkansas, road game, I know that it's something like a touchdown line there. If Will Rogers was full speed, I'd feel pretty optimistic that this could be a toss-up there. If he's not full speed, I don't take a chance. But that's just me. I'm only paid to write about this stuff and second guess. I'm not the guy who has to make the first decisions. But then again, the trainers and the doctors are going to have the real first say. Does he play or doesn't? After that, it's going to be what he feels like. Will's going to want to play. He's had a great game against them last year. I think for his 2 seasons, he has over 800 passing yards against Arkansas, a close loss and a dominating win last year. Although, yes, as you'll remind me, Arkansas was without Jefferson and trying to figure out backup quarterback situation last year on Scott Field, and that just didn't work well. So Rodgers wants to play. All right, say he is held out intentionally or just held out because he can't go, period. Mike Wright, the Vanderbilt transfer, will be the starter. He started, I think, 5 games at Vanderbilt. He had 2 wins towards the end of his season. He beat Florida and, let's see, I guess it was Kentucky. And then, of course, got blown out by Tennessee. But then Tennessee was doing that to most everybody last year. The difference is, in Will Rogers, you have a quarterback who spent 3 years in the air raid. He can move a little, but it's not his primary thing. And that's been one of the difficulties in adapting to this new offense, which is not an air raid offense. It does have air raid elements. In fact, to beat Arizona, they went to an air raid play in overtime. Against South Carolina, they thrived with a couple of air raid type plays. So it's in the book. But this is more of a run-based, play-action type offense. So if he's not able to go, Mike Wright will be in there. Wright is not nearly the passer Rodgers is. He has a strong arm. He's just not particularly accurate, or at least he has not been yet. But if you watch his tape from last year, in those instances when he was on, he was on. It was totally unpredictable. He threw one beautiful pass 2 weeks ago against Western Michigan, and I think the receiver was so surprised that it was so good, he didn't catch it. And it was the best ball he could have possibly thrown there, because that's not the kind of ball he's used to throwing, even in practices. But what he's good at is his footwork. He is in many ways a built-in wildcat back. He's a skinnier, probably much faster version of Jefferson. He's not going to run over anybody, but he can bounce off a tackle and make some gains. His is more read, move quickly, keep the ball protected, which is something Rodgers struggles with when he does run, protecting the ball. You feel safer with Wright doing that, and it makes the defense stay at least a little bit more honest as far as side to side, instead of stacking against the Jaquavius Marks or any of the backs who might play. So I would look at that. And if he was to go down, well, then you're probably looking at a true freshman in Chris Parson, who hasn't played a game since he tore up his knee as a senior in high school last fall.
And if I would have told you before the season that this point of the season that Arkansas as a team only has 1,000 yards rushing and that their defense would be carrying them, what would you say? And how has, when it comes to the defense of Arkansas, again, preparing, possibly throwing in a new quarterback, how much of a challenge is that, knowing how stout Arkansas's defense is?
Well, let's start with the positive there first. That is a stout defense. They made Jaden Milroe. He had some shot plays, sure. But once that was taken care of, they made him look really pedestrian last week and confused him on what to do with the ball, shut down Alabama's first down rushing plays. And that's something Barbet loves to run on first down. So this is an area where Arkansas has a chance to really set a tone defensively there. This is a very impressive defense in that regard. They're physical. They got speed at the linebacker position, something State really misses at times. And they just cover a lot of ground, and they make you work for whatever you get. Now, If you can crack that seam, if you can catch somebody not being gap sound, if you can just get lucky and somebody doesn't finish off a tackle, you can make gains after you get past that first and second level. The trick, of course, is you got to get there,
Yeah.
and they make it tough. Uh, Flipping to the other, as far as what we would have expected Arkansas's rush game, Zach Arnett mentioned something interesting, and other coaches have too. They think that college football ought to go to the NFL model where sack yardage counts against your passing and not your rushing.
Amen. Yes.
That's unfairly docking the Razorback ground game, all the sacks that they're taking out of necessity. That is not a criticism, by the way, of Jefferson or the pass protection. That's just the nature of how they're playing. But it's showing up badly on the Arkansas run game, which if anybody takes those numbers seriously, well that's your fault. What you do is you turn on the film and say, no, these guys can and do run the football, and they do it well. So don't pay attention to the stat sheet. Watch what's happening on the stadium floor.
And I think with the offensive line for Arkansas, we've noticed that, last year in the Browns, he wanted to spread things out, spread the blocking out. And now it's like your situation at Mississippi State. It's a new coaching scheme. It's you're going from air raid to your play action. Almost a similar kind of situation with these two programs. And now you're asking your linemen to scrunch in, two tight end set sometimes, and then block straight forward. And that's been the biggest struggle. I mean, you're seeing it with the penalties and, jumping off sides and trying to block. And everybody is wondering, like, well, why can't KJ get out of the pocket? Well, when you're blocking guys and the guys are 2-3 yards behind you, it's like I said, it's like the Mighty Ducks in this V formation. You've only got one way to go, and that's right up back through the middle. So it's been a lot of our issues, when it comes to that blocking. And then, of course, it leads to the rushing. We know we have the ability, but it's like we'll have a guy break off a really good run, and then he's kind of absent. So, if they spread it out and run to the outside, we could see a lot more positive yards when it comes to the rushing. But, yes, that's been a big struggle. Yes, the passing yards or the sacks have been a detriment to us, but when it comes to the other running backs and you see their stats, it's straight across the board.
Well, the other thing too is that, again, as we say, Arkansas can run the ball, and Mississippi State knows that. So you talk about the blocking. This was a really common topic. Cole Kubelik asked me about it back in preseason about how would Mississippi State's offensive lineman, who'd spent 3 years in air raid blocking, adjust to run blocking. I thought that question, and especially coming from an offensive lineman himself, was a little off the target, because let's keep in mind, all these guys, Mississippi State, Arkansas, Auburn, wherever, who are playing offensive line, they grew up run blocking. Now, they weren't doing it in college schemes, but they know how to line up and fire off the line of scrimmage. That doesn't have to be taught to them. It's the timing between them, the quarterback, the recognition of what the defensive line is doing. That's different than what they were doing in the air raid. Yes, you still had the same, you had to recognize, but in a different way because you saw different things. Whereas here, you've got to, where's the middle linebacker? How are things shifted this way, that way? The offensive line, I think the interior three has been pretty solid in that score. Cole Smith is just a good old dog at the center position. You've got Nick Jones and Stephen Lasoya, the Middle Tennessee State transfer of a couple of years ago. They're playing solid. Where State's offensive line has had some issues has been the tackle positions, and they're still trying to figure out the right combination for the situations. You have Dollar Bill Johnson, who generally starts the games, but Percy Lewis is getting more snaps at the left tackle position. Right tackle, we had high hopes that Cameron Jones, who missed the bowl game with knee surgery, would come back just playing as well as he did last year. He hasn't. He's had some flashes, but he's just not quite the same player, and a knee injury can do that to a guy, even to a lineman. So they're working young kid Bell, junior college player, in there. If they figure that offensive line set out, I think that will settle down the offense a good bit more because State's going to run the ball. I keep mentioning Jaquavius Marks. Even at 80%, he's a really good SEC running back. But now you've got Seth Davis, the true freshman, who's got that little burst that Jaquavius doesn't have. And you got Kevon Lee, the Penn State transfer, who can muscle with anyone. He's a guy you'd love to watch running behind that Razorback offensive line as well. So I think if you just lined up those two rushing attacks this weekend, old dogs like us, we'd enjoy watching that. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
it may not sell a lot of tickets to the fans who want to see the flash and the flare, but I think that'd be a good matchup. The thing is, both teams know it, and both teams are going to try to take that away. So the quarterbacks on each side are going to have to make plays through the air, meaning, okay, defensive secondary, you got to cover. And you've got to cover maybe where you don't expect to, because these two quarterbacks are probably forced to throw balls they're not really planning for.
And moving on to a subject that, gets kind of lost in the transition of the game of special teams, and knowing that Arkansas has a lethal kicker and Cam Little, and then even the punter, he's averaging 40, 50 yards a punt, and Max Fletcher. How does a team like Mississippi State prepare knowing that Arkansas has a kicker that, hey, if you're 40 and, or I would say 50 and under, not 40 and under, 50 and under, they're more than likely going to be able to kick a field goal. So what does that put the pressure on the defense, knowing that, that's an extra 10, 20 yards that you're having to keep Arkansas out of, because that's their field goal range. And then, of course, having a punter that can really flip the field. He hit a 70-yarder last week against Alabama. So what difference does that make, coming from someone who's covered the game for as long as you have? How does that put the aspect on Mississippi State?
I used to watch or listen to Jackie Sherrill talking about kicking all the time. And while I'm not sure he always knew what he was talking about, it sure was interesting to hear. And it did teach me a lot about how things really work in the kicking game. State's got a great kicking coach, Eric Mealy. He's probably the assistant coach of the half season at Mississippi State. We talked about that with him last night after practice, and he just lit up and said, yeah, he and his specialist look at the other team's specialist and think, how do we compare with them? And then they decide, I want to one up that guy. Or maybe not on sheer statistics, like you're not going to try to out punt the other punter just for stats, because you're still worried about placement, hang time, coverage, those things. But they want to execute better. They're looking forward to this. And by the way, there's one Bulldog who is particularly looking forward to this if he's healthy and able to go. Freshman place kicker Kyle Ferry from Searcy.
That's right.
Great kid. I've had a chance to meet him.
Freshman of the week, the very first week, was he not?
He became the first freshman to score the first points of a Mississippi State season in something like a dozen years with that field goal. The kid is cold-blooded, but he hurt a heel during the Western Michigan game. Now, he may be eligible. We don't know, but he beat out a transfer, Nicholas Barmira, who came in expecting from the West Coast to be the place kicker and lost his job to this kid. Well, Barmira came in last home game and booted the 3 essential points that made Church State a 2-point score lead. He's going to be fine place kicking. Now, you talk special teams. State's had great coverage so far. Well, really good coverage. A few little lapses there, but they're not getting penalized on kickoffs. They're playing that well. Punt coverage has been outstanding. State's got 2 punters, Andrew Osteen, more of a situational punter, and Keelan Crimmins, a true freshman from Australia, who's the rollout and just boom it long guy. But here's the matchup for Mississippi State. They have probably the best pair of return men in the conference, not the individual best. I mean, Anais Smith at A&M, you can sit there and say, yeah, that guy's in a class by himself, or maybe Kool-Aid McKinstry at Alabama, people like that. But in Tulu Griffin, who will run back kickoffs, and Xavier Thomas, who will run back punts, State's got as good a 1-2 punch in the return game combined as you can ask for. These guys have touchdowns in their resume from last season. They've made big plays. They get consistent games, and they know when not to touch the ball, which can sometimes not doing anything is the very best thing a return man can do. The coverage and the protections work well with him. So I think this is going to be a fun matchup of special teams. That'd make a great contest in and of itself as well for this weekend. If, say everybody decides they don't want to watch these two teams go at it and just try to have somebody win an SEC game, just let the special teams go out there, punt, kick, return, and make it sort of a PPK competition. And the winner gets to take a step towards bowl eligibility.
There you go. Yeah, that's the with the kickoff, you don't see a lot of returns. And like you brought up Anais Smith, back in the day, they'd have Darren McFadden and Felix Jones back there.
Remember them well.
Your stars back there. So, you got your top 3 kickoff returners, averaging 26, 28 yards, per well. Simeon Price, he's got 1 for 28. But if you look at Griffin, averaging 26 yards of return. And then I think even more impressive is Thomas. He's averaging 11. So even on a punt return, say he does kick it 40, 50 yards, and you can get a guy that can average, 11 and a half yards return, that helps combat what we talked about heading into this. And I guess what we'll do is, before we wrap things up with, what your outlook is for the game moving forward for both programs, and we kind of talked about it before with, the entrance of OU and Texas and the no divisions moving forward. How do you think that, the pressure with both of these, and it alludes to the timing of bringing back your quarterback, do you think any of this goes into being bowl eligible, trying to get your program on an upward trajectory, because these things the SEC is about to turn on its head. You got two new neighbors coming in and no divisions. What are teams in a position like Mississippi State and Arkansas looking at? I know you want to finish out the season, but you can't help but not think about moving forward and moving into this new SEC era as we speak.
Well, let me take care of two things first. For fans on both sides here, and I know many Mississippi State Mississippi State has been to 13 straight bowls. Yes, one of them was done on their strength of their academics in 2016. And then after the COVID year, the SEC was able to put State in the Armed Forces Bowl, where they beat Tulsa and made the pick look good. There's still many a fan here, and I'm sure everywhere say bowls don't matter. Oh, heck yes, they do. And yes, the practice time for younger players or for new staff, that matters. What it really matters for here, I'll give you one example. A former athletic director, Scott Strickland, who's now the AD down at Florida, explained to me that when State reopened a renovated, expanded Davis Wade Stadium in 2014, much of the bowl payments over the life of the 20-year bond were being used to erase that debt. And so State needs to be bowl eligible. That's one example. Another example is it keeps the conference's name in front. And by the way, I ultimately think that conferences will not just have agreements with bowls. They're going to own bowls outright or be in just a straight up partnership and put whatever teams they want in there, regardless of record. I think bowl eligibility is a thing that is not really going to be of concern much longer, that the bowls be retained, and leagues like especially the SEC, which has the huge advantage of sitting in bowl territory. It's the Sun Belt. Can lock up so many of these bowl games and put teams in there. With Texas and Oklahoma, you probably have to do that. But again, that's one of those long-term kind of things that I could babble on for hours about, along with what's going to happen with the alleged super conference or the breakaway of football from the NCAA, all sorts of things like that. But back to your question there, yeah, bowl eligibility matters, and it matters for Mississippi State. It matters for Arkansas. You don't want to be sitting home at Christmas.
No.
They're the last thing a player, especially underclassman, wants to do is his season ends on the last Thursday or Saturday of November, and he's still got a couple weeks of school, and now he's got to go report to that strength coach and get back to work on stuff that usually he wouldn't be doing until springtime because his team is bowling. Things like that matter. Even the bowl swag, those things matter. This is why this game is important for both teams. I still think Mississippi State has a route to bowl eligibility no matter what happens this game. Arkansas at 5 losses, they've got less margin to play with. Now they've played most of their bad games so far. The tough matchups, you probably got a chance now going down the stretch. And I'll say this for Arkansas too. Everybody's made a great big deal about the fact that 4 of the 5 SEC losses have been by 1 score. That catches your eye, and it should. It shows a team that stays competitive, keeps it in question, and is always in position to win. But that can go 2 ways. It can also go the way that sooner or later we're going to win one of these, or it could go down the track of, oh, well, it's a 1-score game. We expect to lose now. Not that anyone would say it that way, but you get what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah, you lean on the moral victory universe. Our fans are on that. And, to your whole bowl swag talk, the bowl only doesn't matter if you lose the game. That's when everybody well, it don't matter. They had opt-outs and stuff. It does matter. And
that Liberty Bowl State played 2 years ago was the most miserable bowl experience of my life. And I went through the 1981 Hall of Fame Bowl, rest in peace, in a deluge in Birmingham in that wonderful Legion Field Stadium. That Liberty Bowl, Mike Leach's last bowl game, was just gosh awful, but it still mattered because it allowed some guys to practice longer who were going to be parts of the lineup come fall and get a head jump on spring training. So these things matter. And frankly, it matters to the university because you get to take your boosters to another game. You got a free hotel trip for them. You show them around. You stroke them a little bit. Put some hydration in front of them, and try to get more donations for your NIL or for facilities uses.
Exactly.
These things matter. So Arkansas is going to be. Every Bulldog I've talked with expects Arkansas to come out. They wouldn't use the phrase, but I'm going to use it: fur on fire. They're going to come out ready to play football. I've never seen an Arkansas team that showed up not ready to play. All the years I've covered the SEC, and yeah, I've been back before when it was still a 10-team SEC. It's like when you saw some of those clips the other day about Mississippi State beating Alabama in 1980. That was my first year working as a professional on this. And you come away from that game thinking, man, it's always going to be this good. Nope, it isn't. But it's still fun, and I still enjoy doing it. And I'm definitely looking forward to this trip. Now, I will say this, you hoteliers up in that the Fayetteville to Bentonville strip, y'all are thieves. but that's true for most of the conference, I have to say.
I tell people it's almost as good to stay in Alma, which is about 45 minutes to the south.
If it wasn't an 11 a.m. game, I would probably stay at Siloam Springs. I found a nice price there, but I said 11 o'clock. I've got to be at the stadium by 8 o'clock. I just can't take that chance. So I'll be up the interstate a little bit. I found a place, and my wife will just find things to kill time during there while I'm writing my story and getting ready to head on back to Starkville and start the rest of the season on Sunday.
Yes, sir. And there's a lot to do in Fayetteville and the surrounding areas for her to do. But David, I appreciate you coming on and talking Believe sports with us. I love being able to connect with other Believe podcasters and stuff, and have a very safe trip with you and your wife to Fayetteville. And other than Saturday, have a good luck the rest of the way.
Well, I'll take that as a positive, and best wishes, and hopefully the Razorbacks will be able to get under control. And it would be nice if they would take care of, those interlopers from y'all's north side. There's something about Missouri just annoys me, them being in our conference.
We're in the same boat with that. Yes, sir. But they keep beating us. So,
and for everybody if they can understand, y'all have the most talented roster in the SEC for this coming baseball season. So I think certainly they should be a top 5, maybe a top 3 national pick this year.
Yes, and we're always looking forward to that Mississippi State battle in baseball, the battle of the best stadiums, even along with the best team.
Well, we know which one that is, but
Yes,
I won't put you on the spot there.
Right. Well, that will do it for this episode of the Hog Talk podcast. Again, always brought to you by Bet Online and Arkansas Brewing Company. We will come back to you, hopefully talking about a Razorback victory on Sunday. Go Hogs.